The rain was relentless that evening, hammering against the windshield like 1,000 small accusations. I sat in the back seat of my son's car, hands clasped tightly around my old leather purse. The only thing I'd insisted on bringing. Robert was at the wheel, his jaw tight, eyes fixed on the road ahead. Beside him, Christine scrolled through her phone, the glow of the screen flickering across her perfectly painted face. The silence between us wasn't new. It had been growing for years, quiet, sharp, and suffocating. When Edward, my husband, passed away 5 years ago, Robert promised to take care of me. He said, "You'll never be alone, Mom." I believed him. I wanted to. But promises have a way of fading once money enters the picture. Ever since Edward's will left most of our assets in my name, Christine had looked at me as though I were a locked vault standing between her and freedom. That night, Robert said we were taking a short drive to discuss some family matters. His tone was polite, even gentle, but his eyes avoided mine as the city lights gave way to the dark stretch of highway. A strange unease crept over me. The rain blurred everything beyond the glass, trees, signs, distance, until the world looked like it was dissolving. Then he pulled over. "Why are we stopping?" I asked. Robert exhaled slowly, not meeting my eyes. "Mom, there's been a misunderstanding about the house paperwork. It's better if you stay somewhere else for a while." For a heartbeat, I couldn't process the words. "Somewhere else? What do you mean?" Christine turned to face me, her smile thin and deliberate. "Just until things settle. It's really for your own good." The rain grew louder, drumming like a warning. My son got out, opened my door, and placed my suitcase on the wet pavement. I wanted to believe he was joking, that any second he'd laugh, scoop the bag back in, and say he was sorry. But he didn't. The car door slammed. The tires spun against the wet asphalt, spraying mud over my shoes as they disappeared into the storm. I stood there, 62, widowed, and suddenly homeless, watching the red taillights fade. A lifetime of love vanished in the rain. My throat burned, but no tears came. Just a hollow whisper escaped my lips. "Robert, why?" And then, through the downpour, headlights approached from the opposite direction, slow, deliberate, almost searching. A window rolled down, and an elderly woman's voice cut through the storm. "Pretend I'm your mother," she said softly, "and your son will regret what he's done." The headlights cut through the storm like a blade, revealing a sleek black car gliding to a stop beside me. The passenger window lowered, and I saw her. An elderly woman with silver hair tied neatly behind her head, rain streaking down the glass between us. Her voice was calm, but carried the kind of authority that refused to be ignored. "Get in, child," she said, her tone firm, yet strangely maternal. "You'll freeze out here." I hesitated, glancing at the empty road stretching endlessly behind me. There was nowhere else to go. The moment I stepped into her car, warmth enveloped me, soft leather seats, faint lavender perfume, the hum of classical music. She turned her wheelchair slightly to face me, her eyes sharp and assessing. "I'm Eleanor Riley," she said, "and you are a woman who's been wronged." Her words pierced me more deeply than the cold ever could. I didn't answer. I just stared out the window, watching the rain chase itself across the glass. "Don't bother denying it," she continued, her voice gentler now. "I've seen that look before. It's the face of someone who trusted too much." I felt my throat tighten. "My son." The words trembled on my lips. "He left me, took everything my husband and I built, and left me on the side of the road like trash." Eleanor's hands rested on her lap, motionless. "Then he has no idea what he's lost." The car rolled forward again, the wipers slicing through the storm. Outside, trees blurred into shadows. But inside, her presence was steady, anchoring. There was something regal about her, not just in posture, but in spirit. She spoke like a woman used to being obeyed, yet her eyes held an ache I recognized. The ache of someone who had once been betrayed too. We reached her estate within the hour. The mansion rose out of the fog, grand yet weathered, its windows glowing softly like beacons in the night. A nurse met us at the entrance, helping Eleanor down a ramp and into the hall. "You'll stay here tonight," Eleanor said. "We'll decide what comes next when you've eaten and warmed up." I wanted to protest, to say I couldn't impose, but exhaustion pressed heavier than pride. The nurse, Diane, as I later learned, led me to a guest room overlooking the gardens. I sat by the fire, the flames crackling like distant memories. For the first time since Edward's death, I felt safe enough to let the tears fall. They came quietly, without sobs, just years of trust, unraveling drop by drop. When I woke the next morning, sunlight streamed through lace curtains, gilding the room in gold. A tray of breakfast sat by the window, and beside it, a note in elegant handwriting. "You're not alone anymore." As I read the words, I didn't know whether to feel comforted or terrified, because kindness, after betrayal, is its own kind of danger. Eleanor's mansion was unlike any place I'd ever seen. It wasn't just large, it was alive. Every hallway seemed to hum with quiet stories. Every photograph a whispered confession. Women of different ages moved gracefully through its rooms, some tending the gardens, others reading in silence by the tall windows. They all looked at me with the same kind of understanding, the kind you don't get from pity, but from shared pain. Over breakfast, Eleanor told me what this place was. "I take in women who have been cast aside," she said simply. "By sons, by husbands, by families who decided their worth had an expiration date." Her words sank into me. "And you help them start over." "I help them remember who they are," she replied. "Starting over is easy. Remembering is hard." Days passed in a rhythm that felt almost sacred. Diane, her granddaughter, showed me around the property. She was young, maybe 30, with kind eyes and the quiet patience of someone who had seen more sorrow than she deserved. I noticed how carefully she watched over Eleanor, how her hand always hovered near the wheelchair's handle, as if protecting something far more fragile than bone or skin. "She saved me too," Diane said one evening as we walked through the rose garden. "Not from others, from myself. That's what she does. She makes you confront the parts of you you'd rather bury." That night, I couldn't sleep. My thoughts returned to Robert, his nervous smile, the way he'd avoided looking at me as he left me on that highway. I wanted to hate him, but hate felt heavy. Instead, I felt hollow, a silence where love used to live. When I finally went downstairs, I found Eleanor in the library, awake, reading by lamplight. Without looking up, she said, "You think forgiving him would make you weak." I froze. "How could you possibly know what I'm thinking?" "Because I once had a son too," she said softly. "And I made the mistake of confusing forgiveness with surrender. They're not the same." Her gaze met mine, steady and sharp. "You'll face him again, Mary. And when you do, you must decide whether to destroy what he's become, or remind him of who he used to be." I wanted to ask how she knew I'd ever see Robert again, but something in her tone told me she already had a plan. The next morning, Diane handed me a folder with a quiet seriousness. "Eleanor asked me to give you this," she said. Inside were documents, bank transfers, signatures, property deeds, all tied to my name, my home. Proof of how Robert and Christine had manipulated me. My hands trembled as I looked up at Diane. "Why would she show me this?" Diane's voice was calm. "Because she believes you're ready to decide what justice looks like. Through the window, sunlight broke over the horizon, washing the old mansion in gold. For the first time, I didn't feel lost. I felt the stirring of something I hadn't known in years. Resolve. When Eleanor told me it was time, she didn't phrase it as a question. Justice demands timing, she said, her voice quiet but resolute. And your time has come. She had arranged everything. A quiet afternoon meeting at my former home. The house I had built with Edward. The house my son had taken. I hadn't seen it since that night on the highway. As the car turned onto the familiar driveway, my stomach tightened. The roses Edward planted were gone. In their place stood Christine's ornamental stones, cold, sterile, and perfect, like her smile. Robert opened the door. His face shifted from surprise to discomfort when he saw me. "Mom, what are you doing here?" I looked past him into the house. My house. The furniture was gone, replaced by modern glass and chrome. The warmth had been stripped away. "I came to talk," I said evenly. Christine appeared at the top of the stairs, her expression unreadable. "A talk about what? You signed everything over. We have nothing left to discuss." Eleanor's voice, calm and commanding, echoed from behind me. "That's where you're wrong, Mrs. Hughes." Christine's eyes widened as Eleanor wheeled herself into the hall, Diane following close behind. "Who are you?" "I'm someone who believes in consequences," Eleanor replied. Robert's posture stiffened. "This isn't necessary. Neither was leaving your mother on a highway." Eleanor cut in. "But here we are." Diane handed Robert the folder I had received days earlier. "You'll want to look at those," she said softly. Robert flipped through the pages, his color draining. "These are fake." "They're not," I said quietly. "Every signature, every transfer, your handwriting." Eleanor's contacts verified it all. For a moment, silence swallowed the room. I could hear only the rain tapping against the windows. The same sound as that night of abandonment. Christine's voice finally broke the stillness, trembling with anger. "What do you want from us? Money, apologies?" I met her gaze. "I want nothing. I came to return what isn't mine." Resentment. Robert's eyes, filled with something between shame and disbelief. "Mom, you could ruin us." "I could," I said. "But I won't, because you've already done that yourselves." Eleanor smiled faintly, the corners of her lips barely lifting. "Mercy is a rarer punishment than justice," she murmured. Robert dropped his head into his hands. For the first time, I saw not the man who betrayed me, but the boy I once knew, the one who used to press wildflowers into my palms and call them gifts. Christine turned away, her shoulders trembling. Whether from guilt or fury, I couldn't tell. Eleanor reached for my hand. "You've chosen," she said softly. I nodded, tears pricking my eyes. "Yes, I choose to forgive." The words felt both heavy and freeing, as if the air itself had been waiting for them. When we left the house, Eleanor's fingers tightened gently around mine. "Now," she whispered, "we begin again." And for the first time since Edward's death, I believed her. Time has a strange way of softening what once seemed unbreakable. Months turned into years, and what began as a refuge became a purpose. After Eleanor's death, her mansion no longer felt like a sanctuary. It became a mission. I renamed it the Aurora Foundation, just as she had dreamed. A place for women who had been cast out by the very families they once built their lives around. I still remember the morning the foundation opened. The hallways were filled with the hum of quiet hope, laughter mingling with tears, hands trembling as they signed their names on the intake forms. Each woman carried a different story, but their pain had the same shape: abandonment, betrayal, loneliness. When I looked at them, I saw versions of myself, and I promised them that none of us would ever be invisible again. Diane stood beside me through it all. She had Eleanor's patience, that rare blend of steel and grace. Together, we built networks of homes, legal aid programs, and support circles across the state. Newspapers began to call us the House of Second Chances. But for me, it was never about publicity. It was about reclaiming dignity from the ashes of what love had once destroyed. Sometimes late at night, I would find myself in Eleanor's old library, her wheelchair still tucked beside the fireplace. The smell of her lavender oil lingered faintly in the air. I would close my eyes and imagine her voice, steady, sharp, unyielding. "Forgive when they expect you to hate," she would say. "That's how you win." One winter evening, I received a call from the hospital. Christine was dying. For a long time, I sat in silence, the receiver cold against my ear. I didn't owe her anything. No visits, no forgiveness. But something in me knew that not going would be the final act of bitterness I didn't want to carry. When I entered her hospital room, she looked fragile. Her once perfect posture collapsed under the weight of regret. Her eyes fluttered open, and for a moment, I saw the woman she might have been without greed. "Mary," she rasped, her voice thin as paper. "Robert left. Years ago. Took everything. I have nothing." I reached for her hand, not out of sympathy, but out of mercy. "You still have a chance," I said quietly, "to forgive yourself." Tears slipped down her cheeks. "Do you forgive me?" I smiled faintly. "I already did." She closed her eyes, and a peace I hadn't seen in years settled over her face. When I stepped outside, dawn was breaking over the horizon. The same shade of gold that had poured through Eleanor's curtains that first morning I woke in her home. I realized then that forgiveness doesn't erase the past. It redeems it. Every act of cruelty I endured had led me here, to light, to purpose, to peace. Now, when the wind passes through the garden Eleanor loved, I sometimes hear her voice again, soft, proud, unyielding. "Pretend I'm your mother," she whispers. And I whisper back, smiling through the dawn, "You always were."